Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Honorable Megan Smith, Chief Technology Officer and Assistant to the President, to moderate a discussion on the Innovation Advantage with Dr. Vijay Chandru, Co-founder, Chairman, and CEO of Strand Life Sciences, Mr. Desh Deshpande, Chairman of Sparta Group, LLC, Ms. Sarah Minker, Founder and CEO of Grow Intelligence, Mr. Lars Rabian Sorensen, President and CEO of Novo Nordisk, and Mr. Eric Spiegel, President and CEO of Siemens USA.
Welcome, everybody. We were just backstage and we realized we are a panel on innovation that stretches from a company of 20 to a company of 200,000. So I really want to welcome my panelists who've joined us today. First, Eric Spiegel, who's the President and CEO of Siemens USA, which is just an extraordinary company. And we're going to talk a little bit about the bigger companies here in the U.S. Next to him is Lars Sorensen, CEO of Novo Nordisk. Extraordinary work in the area of health and a 90-year-old company. Wonderful company. Also a leader in access to medicine, which we thank Lars for. Next to him, Sarah Menker has a new company in the area of information, which we'll talk a little bit about the emerging data sciences and information areas for agriculture and health. She's from Nairobi, New York, as a company, co-founded, co-located. Desh Deshpande, the leader of the Deshpande Center for Technological Innovation at MIT, an extraordinary entrepreneur, serial entrepreneur in the area of communications and networking. And then next to him, Vijay Chandru, who is joining us as the founder of Strand Life, also extraordinary innovation in bioinformatics and data science technologies. So thank you for being here, everybody. We want to talk a little bit about the climate in the United States for innovation and the climate around the world and how people are collaborating. And I wondered, Eric, if you could start us off a little bit with the experiences and some Lars of being a larger company operating here and the kinds of things you are doing. I know when we were talking, you've been talking a lot about locating manufacturing nearby to customers and some of the advantages you've seen there. So let's start there.
Sure. Thanks, Megan. It's great to be here. Siemens has actually been in the U.S. for over 150 years, but it isn't really until the last 10 or 15 years that we've invested heavily here in manufacturing. So over the last 10 years, we've invested over $30 billion here in the U.S. We now have 50,000 employees and about 70 manufacturing facilities. And an amazing thing happened as we started to do that. We realized that the U.S. was not only a great place to manufacture because the market here is big, but it also was a great place for us to drive innovation with research and development, and also a great place to export. So if you go back just 15 or 20 years, Siemens was much smaller in the U.S., and we did very little manufacturing here. Most of what we did here was exported from other countries around the world, primarily from Europe and from Germany. But today, the vast majority of our value added here in the U.S. is manufactured here in the U.S., and in fact, we're a net exporter of about $5 billion out of the U.S. So how's that happened? Well, as we started to build our plants here, we realized that the relationships that we were able to build with the local states and cities, but also the universities and national labs allowed us to move much of our innovation over here. So today, we spend over $1 billion just in the U.S. on innovation, and I'll give you a couple of good examples. We now have the largest light rail train manufacturing facility in the U.S. in Sacramento, California. And at that facility, we now do much of our innovation around light rail. And in fact, Siemens over about 100 years ago invented the first electric train. This year, we sold in the Midwest the first electric diesel passenger trains in the U.S. It's the first time we've ever done electric diesel, and we did it with a relationship with Cummins Engine and also with support from a number of other external players. And now we're doing a lot of the research and development for that right here in the U.S. We recently built a large gas turbine manufacturing facility in Charlotte, North Carolina. We're doing work with the local universities and community colleges there in North Carolina on gas turbine technology. We're also doing a lot of work with other universities around the country, like MIT and others in that area, and also some of the national labs in the Department of Energy on gas turbine technology. So over time, what we realized is not just a great market for us to sell into, but also a great market for us to innovate and take that innovation not just for the U.S. market, but to be able to export globally.
Thank you. Yeah, I think, Lars, you were saying that you were having similar things about location and also some of the integration with the universities. And I don't know if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, thank you, Megan. And also thanks for inviting Novo Nordisk from Denmark. We're the world's biggest biopharmaceutical company, manufacturing insulins and human growth hormones and clotting factors. And we're about at a crossroad that Eric was talking about. Our history so far in the U.S. has primarily, in the manufacturing side, been manufacturing for domestic use in the U.S. But we're standing at a crossroad of making a major investment in the U.S. We're considering making a major investment in the U.S. to move active ingredient manufacturing so that we will have full line manufacturing in the U.S. with a view also to export out of the U.S. The original innovation which my company is founded on came from North America. It was then refined by an American company in the U.S. and by us outside the U.S. And we realized that over time in the pharmaceutical industry, all our processes, all our product development, much like Siemens in a way, are global processes. The products are used globally, that all throughout the process from idea to commercialization is characterized by partnerships. The original ideas comes from academia, from small biotech companies, from NIH, government institutions. They then need to be evaluated, they need to be validated, then they need to be tested, developed. That all happens in collaboration with various types of government institutions and private companies until such time that we go into the regulatory process and have our products approved. And when we start marketing, obviously we are marketing to the private market as well as to the government. So manufacturing in the U.S. for us is easier for the U.S. market because the understanding of the regulatory environment, the high-tech, highly educated engineering staff which is required for our manufacturing is located right here. So by continuing to invest in the United States, we ensure ourselves that we stay ahead competitively with adopting the latest technology so that we can use it both for our market access in the U.S. but also for our global processes.
Thank you. Yeah, one of the things the President has us very focused on as teams is, you mentioned regulation, just working through as leadership in the administration where we can remove regulation, where we can adapt regulation. So thank you for those points. And also just the return of manufacturing to the United States, which we've seen this whole decade, a resurgence there. So not just the U.S. as, of course, an incredible hub for R&D and some of the early moments for your company of some of the research that grew out and became those products, but really now, in the manufacturing side. I wanted to turn now a little bit into software and big data. And so we have Sarah and Vijay, who are both in incredibly interesting company. I mean, everybody on this panel is using software, and of course Siemens at the large scale. But the use of big data and some of the software, and the reason why you're co-locating. So it's interesting because we have an India, Colorado company. We have a Kenya, New York City company. And if you guys could talk a little bit about your products, what you're doing, so people are familiar, and then specifically about what's the value of co-locating and having context.
Thank you for having me here. So just to provide a bit of context in terms of what we do at Grow Intelligence, if you think of the world we live in, we all talk about the fact that we're going to be over 9 billion people by 2050, and to feed that growing population, we need to increase food production by 70%. We were born off the idea that to do that, there's actually 2.1 billion people employed in the agricultural industry today who we think are hungry for good data and good information. And so what we're doing is building that data hub. And basically a common language for which the agricultural sector can use, which currently doesn't exist, to make really efficient decisions around supply and demand fundamentals that basically drive production, productivity, capital, and everything else. So we've effectively built a software that for the first time basically aggregates really, really large data sets that exist really in the cloud and across the world, and harmonizes them into a single language we've created and allow users to basically run very sophisticated analytics on it to really understand what yields are doing globally on a day-by-day basis. What are trade flows like? How do those trade flows relate to tariffs? How does that relate to the way in which we're seeing the trade of other goods, or how does that relate to things like inflation and oil? So really just trying to create that hub and a single basically space where all that information can reside, where it currently doesn't. And for us, we basically believe that without that, I don't think we can actually achieve that goal. With regards to Megan's question around why we're co-located, when I started the company 3 years ago, I viewed the problem as uniquely an African problem we wanted to solve, that the data problem was really specific to Africa, and we were going to build an Africa-specific product. So I moved to Kenya at the time because Kenya has a reputation within the African continent as becoming the tech hub. There's talent, there's good tech infrastructure, and there's open capital markets. What I discovered once we started to build was the level of sophistication of what we were doing and the types of data sets we were working with, which predominantly also included basically ingesting satellite images daily on a global basis. The type of talent we needed really existed in the US. And so we opened an office in New York at the beginning of last year and have really been scaling up our technology efforts and our engineering efforts, mostly out of the US now.
Great. And one of the other things there is just the open data side of things. And here we are, we're hosted the Department of Commerce, NOAA, and the whole weather industry built on top of them. But
yeah, I mean, what's been incredible in this process of data discovery is the importance of open data. So about 85% of the data sources we currently use today are open in some form. The rest, we basically have to structure private agreements with organizations. But one of the largest sources of data for us has actually been the US government, whether it's the USDA, whether it's NOAA, and our ability to tap into different satellites such as MODIS or Landsat. The importance of that can't be underestimated because it's actually our ability to build products off those data sets that really matters. And the idea of having to protect data is really obscure to me, I guess, as a company, because on its own, it's not really worth much. It's what we choose to do with it. And I think ultimately, the more we open up data across the world, the more interesting companies that are global in scale can be built.
we just celebrated what's called Sunshine Week here in the U.S., which was last week. It's named for President James Madison, the U.S.'s fourth president, who was the most open government, open data president, and his birthday is March 16th. But President Obama, since the beginning of coming into office, has opened 120,000 data sets. So it's one of our priorities, and we enjoy great partnership with many people in this room in the Open Government Partnership, which is made up of 65 countries and many civil society and commercial entities. So there's a fabulous trend of opening data on which great companies have been built already in geo and weather and others, and begin to continue to be built. Vijay, you have an incredible company in the area of bioinformatics and genomics and others. Talk a little bit about that and about the co-location and the talent that you were talking about before.
Thank you. Strand is about a 300 employee company. We started just around the time that Bill Clinton announced the first human reference genome, so just at the start of the millennium. And, it was pretty clear then that biology was becoming an information science, right? And so the idea that actually computer scientists could get together and make an impact in biology became clear. And this is where, data science had a real application area. So Strand began with those roots. And structurally, I think Strand was also historically the first company in India started by professors. And, this again, we had learned from the US. I think when I was a professor at Purdue in the 1980s was when the Bayh-Dole Act, came into effect, and the whole idea of universities spinning off companies from intellectual property gained at the university was just taking root, and so it was an idea that we exported to India, and so Strand was created out of the Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore, and for 10 years we essentially stayed a bioinformatics company. Just as we saw the applications in personalized medicine and precision medicine starting to happen, we pivoted the company into an actual, precision medicine company. And today we have maybe around 60 computer scientists, but over 100 molecular biologists in the company, and a lot of clinician-oriented people as well. So it's the reason, to co-locate, it was actually, if you were doing just bioinformatics, doing it in India made a lot of sense. There's a lot of capabilities in informatics and software there, of course, that you could leverage. But the reason the US is exciting is, of course, because there's such a great ecosystem for genomics and genomic applications here. And I think a lot of credit goes to the US government for the initiatives, initially in the Human Genome Project, and now more recently in the presidential initiative in precision medicine. And I think Battelle Institute has actually done a little research on this that I think this was back 2-3 years back, that I think $5.5 billion of investment that the US government had made in genomics has actually resulted in an $800 billion industry, right? So I think President Obama sometimes mentions this as the 141-fold payoff that investment in genomics has had. So for us to eventually come back to the US, invest here, build labs in Denver, and actually today is an important day for us because our first clinical report on a patient is being delivered today.
Congratulations.
So we just got the lab running out of Denver.
Terrific.
Right. So, but I think our growth, we do believe, will be in the US simply because this is today the most exciting market for precision medicine and personalized medicine. So.
It's interesting you say about the ecosystem, and it's something that the U.S. has done for a long time and is continuing to push. President very much out there as leading us on the Precision Medicine Initiative and pushing us between NIH and the Cancer Institute on the research side, grant making, and then lots of wonderful public-private partnerships with companies, looking at open data, looking at interop at the building block level. Amongst the different patient records and trying to build cohorts and collaboration there. There's also some with the Brain Initiative, if you also think about sort of AI and high-performance computing, and that's a similar thing, like a grant-making and work on the research side, work with great universities, work with the corporations, work with the startups all the way across, and trying to be more API-based, in marketplace versus RFPs. Dash. So one of the things we were talking about a little bit is the idea of all boats rise, and multi-location and entrepreneurship. And, you've built so many incredible companies in your career and worked with so many entrepreneurs and really have turned your attention to enabling ecosystems, enabling entrepreneurs from the MIT work. Also, I know that you have some in local work in Massachusetts and Lowell and others. So maybe talk a little bit about U.S. entrepreneurship and also global entrepreneurship.
Sure. Megan, I grew up in India and left India about 42 years ago and built most of the companies in the U.S. But the way we built companies 20 years ago is very different than the way companies get built now. And that's primarily because this whole innovation process itself has changed quite a bit. US taxpayers spend about $50 billion a year just in university research. And in the universities, about some time ago, the way it worked was professors, researchers, graduate students came up with ideas, the best among them patented technologies, and then the licensing offices tried to look for opportunities for those patents. But in the new way the innovation is being done, if the innovators have a desire for impact, because there is some pure research that we need to support, but if people have a desire for impact, I think they try to connect with relevance upfront, so that as they innovate, it's more likely that their innovation is directed to some burning problem in the world, and it has a natural pull in the marketplace and has an impact. And the way the companies were built 20 years ago, we built companies in US, primarily sold in US, and then you went to Europe, and then Japan, and then Asia, and then, it was a very gradual sequential process. But now, most of the businesses have to think global upfront. And so people are looking for that relevance. So people in this room from 60, 70 different countries, innovators in US are looking for that relevance. They're looking for understanding the problems and the customers globally. And so there's lots of opportunities for collaboration. And sometimes, people think about innovation in US as one big United States. But that's not true. There is thousands of companies and universities, and a lot of the innovation is contextual. So I would really encourage people in the audience here to look for those opportunities, collaborate with lots of people. There's opportunities to collaborate in lots of different ways.
Yeah, there's representatives from, I think, all 50 states here and many countries, and so lots of opportunities to do that. I think, also in the emerging markets, we're seeing great collaborations between the larger companies into these regions. One of the things, Sarah, you were talking a little bit about was the new IBM Center, and I know Siemens and others are doing amazing work across the world. I don't know if you want to say a little bit about what they're doing or what you're seeing.
What I was sharing with Megan earlier was when you look at the likes of IBM research labs, which used to basically predominantly be run out of New York State in one location or another, that has really started to expand and start to move into very localized context. And so they just recently opened a lab in Kenya, in Nairobi, and the idea being that they bring the IBM research brand name as well as employees from their labs in upstate New York into Nairobi, but collaborate with local companies actively to innovate for the local environment. And for the local environment, this is actually on a Pan-African basis. But I think the innovations that come out of those types of collaborations can actually have much greater impact and probably touch upon problems in ways that you couldn't do if you didn't have that type of collaboration, because the local expertise or the context that comes with that can't be underestimated in the way in which we basically tackle global problems.
Megan, just to add to that, I think it comes back to a little bit of the marginal cost of that innovation. That is, US has already invested and is investing for the bigger markets, let's say nanotechnology centers, hundreds of millions of dollars, or NASA, or any of these things. Now, the same infrastructure can be used to innovate other things that are very low cost. And they're more applicable for the emerging markets because the innovation disruption always requires that those solutions be tried out in places which are easier to enter. And maybe after they're perfected, they come back to the more developed economies. So there is a lot of innovators in US looking for these partnerships, like people in Bangladesh or Kenya or India or Africa, all the different places, because I think they need to understand the customer base, really understand what the customer's needs and so on. So I would really encourage, that is, it's not an infrastructure that exists in those places because it's just too expensive. Right. And so I think there's a huge opportunity to leverage this infrastructure that already exists in US And also, if you look at the growth for the last 50 years, most of the businesses was done for the 2 billion people in the world. The other 5 billion people got whatever was left over. But now people are realizing that that's going to be a big market for the next 50 years. And so most of the companies are very interested in sort of trying to attack both markets. And in sometimes you go for the 2 billion and then go to the other 5 billion. In other cases, particularly if the technology is very cost effective, then you're better off going to the 5 billion and then coming back to the 2 billion. And so I think the collaboration is something that a lot of the innovators in the US will really be very aggressively looking for.
Yeah, if I could just bring up a point here that, again, about emerging markets and, a market like the US, is that, one of the interesting things is thinking of affordability as a driver of innovation, right? And frugal innovation. And sometimes, contextually locating it in the emerging markets, does help to bring in that factor. At the same time, you do not want to compromise on the innovation. You still want. So I think actually working in both sort of environments has a beneficial effect to both. And so you take the best practices, the safety issues, and so on in healthcare, and apply them globally. But then you also get the benefits of some of that frugality into the healthcare system here.
I was going to just add one small point to what was said, which is also, capital. So part of, another reason why, as a small company, we ended up being located in the U.S. or co-located in the U.S. is because our investors ultimately came from the U.S. Our investors sit in New York. An ecosystem, for a small company like ours, we're only 20 people now. Beginning of last year, we were 4. And now we're scaling really fast. But it's only possible because those investors have connected us to their networks and enabled us within an ecosystem that already is well established and exists, which in emerging markets, while there's a lot of excitement and a lot of hope for the future, if you are, really looking to scale fast and build something big, I think you ultimately end up coming back to the U.S. because the ecosystem and the support system that exists for young entrepreneurs or smaller companies is just really great.
Yeah, please.
It is quite interesting to listen to my co-panelists. At this end of the panel, we are manufacturing stuff, machines, power plants, and in the area of information and information technology, of course, the barriers to entry are so small that the whole innovation cycle is fragmented, and you will find innovative input anywhere in the world where there is an interest and where there's relevance. In our business, and I'm not going to speak for Eric's business, but for my own business, we need to develop products for the global market. It is a very regulated, as we all know, regulated business. And in each step of the innovation cycle, we harness the creativity from smaller companies, from academia, from companies which are specialized in certain aspects of our whole value chain. But it is in a very rigorous global process. And one of the things which is for pharmaceutical companies very attractive about the US is obviously number one, the market, the biggest pharmaceutical market in the world. A very regulated environment with transparent governance, and in fact with the gold standard, so that if you can get approval for your products in the United States, this often goes a long way of ensuring that you can get approval elsewhere. Then also working with clinical and academic institutions in the US, we often find ourselves working with the thought leaders within the therapeutic areas that we are interested in. And then finally, interestingly enough, our interests may actually converge, because I know, Megan, you have a past history with Google, and we now see the advent of Google and Apple and other open source and cloud-based companies trying to add value to our business, how we manage these big chronic diseases, which, of course, we're providing a pharmaceutical, but the lifestyle, how you manage your disease, your interaction with your health professionals, all of those things have implication for the cost of treating the disease and for the outcomes. So eventually our worlds will actually converge, and it's quite interesting to listen to this side of the panel to see their reality.
Thanks, Lars. It's actually, Eric and I were talking a little bit about Mark Andreessen says software eats the world, from his Netscape and now Andreessen Horowitz perspective. But you were talking a little bit about Germany and Industry 4.0, and I don't know if you want to mention that because it really ties into what Lars was saying about the bridging between hardware and software that's happening.
Yeah, in Germany, there's a concept that they're talking a lot about. In fact, it's the primary focus of the Hanover Fair this year, which is the largest industrial fair in the world. And Industry 4.0 is really over here. People call it the Internet of Things or a variety of other names. But really, it's about transforming the fourth revolution of industrial manufacturing, really transforming the way we make things. And to make it simple, I would say it's the combination of software, of automation, of big data, in terms of how do we put all those things together with human intelligence to really drive manufacturing, the industrial world forward. And what we're seeing is just a huge opportunity to move to what we would call mass customization. In other words, you can make as many different types of things as you want for about the same cost. And the auto industry is moving pretty quickly in this way, but many, many other industries. And one of the things that people don't talk a lot about, this is a big topic in Germany. It's obviously a big topic here. A lot of people here are focused on the consumer end of what's happening with the digital economy. But the transformation on the industrial end might be much bigger than what we're seeing on the consumer end, and we're at the early stages of that. And one of the reasons why we're here in the U.S., so Industry 4.0 is something that Germany is talking about. Why are we here in the U.S. pushing this forward? Because this is really going to be software-led, and the U.S. is home base for the software industry. Something like 75% by value of all the software in the world is developed right here in the U.S., particularly the decision support software, which is so important to data analytics and data science and also managing machine-to-machine communication and things. So we see the U.S., if you want to be in the new Industry 4.0 or the Internet of Things, you have to be here. You have to be in the U.S. You have to be working with these companies. And I think, as someone was saying, not just in Silicon Valley, there are hubs of this going on all over the country. And so we're active in many, many of our businesses and working with local software developers and local automation companies to combine that with our capability to really drive forward this fourth revolution in industrial manufacturing. And this is going to be a big wave. It's going to come very fast. And it's not about robots replacing jobs. It's about creating more value, more jobs, and basically higher paying jobs as well. Mm-hmm. So we see this as a very positive wave, and we really think the U.S. is going to lead this wave because of the advantage we have on the technology and the software side.
That's great. And we're seeing an emergence, exactly as you said, around Internet of Things, actually with the universities and city partnerships. Whether it's Carnegie Mellon with Pittsburgh, Howard University here in D.C. on water, MIT and Boston. So we're going to be hosting a meeting at the White House later in the coming months with those groups. But even talking to the South Bend mayor, they have a $600 million project that they need to do to add an extra storm drain because of pollution. Instead, working with Notre Dame, they found some sensors and pumps, and for a fraction of the cost, they actually load balance using software and sensors, et cetera, to change the destiny of that, so they didn't have to spend that money much cheaper to solve that problem and have a great environmental impact. But I think we're going to see that around the world, and we're seeing that across the U.S. And leveraging that same thing that we've been talking about on the panel, the ecosystem of the university, emergent technologies and licensing, having the right licensing terms for people to spin out and for faculty or entrepreneurs, student entrepreneurs, grad students to found companies is really important.
Yeah, maybe just one quick example, building on the software story. The earlier panel, I think they were talking about some of the advantages of the U.S., particularly on the energy side now, particularly in terms of unconventional oil and gas, or fracking, as many people call it. But one of the things that they're trying to do now with fracking is really turn that into a more advanced manufacturing process. Because they need to get to oil faster, they need to drive down the cost of fracking, and they need to do it in a much more environmentally safe way. And so one of the things we're doing, again, working with a university, in this case West Virginia University, through a DOE grant, and we're bringing our software and our sensoring and our automation technology to these fracking sites to understand how can we automate more of what's happening on there, how can we get better access to data, not just for reporting, but so that we can share that information across multiple sites to help provide information to get to oil and gas faster, drive down cost, and meet all of these requirements that are coming out. And I see the President just announced some new fracking rules the other day. We're going to need much better information to manage these sites going forward. So that's another area people don't think of as a manufacturing area, but really it is moving toward a more advanced manufacturing kind of technology, and software, again, is going to be the key to doing that across those sites.
Terrific. One of the things we're also seeing is a kind of resurgence of innovation in the area of skills development. We just launched an initiative called Tech Hire, which is leveraging code boot camps. We have a lot of, I think it's 500,000 open jobs in the tech sector, which are not necessarily a four-year degree or graduate level. We, of course, have those, and the companies will, of course, continue to hire them, but helping employers pick up folks who might not have a technical background, but in 3 months, using online or offline boot camps and other paths straight in. Today, the President is welcoming over 100 young people into the science fair. We have a Siemens winner in the group, which is exciting. And the theme is diversity and inclusion. We have kids from, of course, all over the United States, but also girls and boys, kids from all different backgrounds, doing extraordinary things. And so kind of the access to information has shifted on behalf for not only collaboration, but also for training. And I don't know if anybody wanted to talk a little bit about skills and workforce and HR and that area at all.
Well, Megan, the education itself is probably one of the most exciting fields for innovation right now. Education is roughly where cell phones were 20 years ago when we used to carry a suitcase. So in 20 years, I think education is going to profoundly change. And there's going to be a lot of innovation there. And part of the reason why I'm excited about President's promotion of diversity and so on is that if you really need to bring education to the masses, you have to make a lot of people into innovators. I think the old model of innovation was there was a few people who could come up with E is equal to MC square and the problems are solved, right? That's true if you want to solve the problem just for a few people in the world. But if you really want to solve problems for a lot of people in the world, things have to get contextualized. It's almost like building distribution channels, because if you have to take solutions for millions and billions, you need thousands of people who are innovators, who can absorb that innovation and contextualize and deliver the value of that innovation. And so I think inclusive innovation is going to be the way to sort of crack that problem of reaching the masses. And there's going to be a lot of business there. There's going to be a lot of opportunities for doing things in U.S., but even so more globally.
I mean, I look at that, in a very similar light, but, obviously I don't really look like a typical tech entrepreneur the way we understand tech entrepreneurs in the U.S. today. But I think a lot of that is shifting, and it's shifting because the speed at which technologies are changing actually require basically a constant understanding of technology. So the only thing that you actually need is curiosity. And so if you basically enable an environment of curious people, I think the way in which you tackle the diversity and inclusion problem changes, because it's no longer linked to you need X, Y, and Z skill set, and if you don't have that, I don't need you on my team or I can't use you. Because the truth is, 12 months from now, I might be using a whole different suite of technologies, and we're going to have to pick those up. So ultimately, if you build businesses off of people who have some sort of core skill set and curiosity, the two combined, I think, take you a long way, because the amount of openly available free education online, I mean, Coursera is a perfect example of, how our engineers basically pick up new skills all the time, because, as we start exploring new technologies and no one on the team has a skill on it, people jump on and try to pick it up really quickly. In terms of context, I think companies from the get-go need to increasingly start becoming global if they're going to tackle global problems. We're a small company. I think we speak about 13 languages in 20 people, and we're 70% female. And it was not by design. It's actually, we have very incredibly difficult technical exams that people take to get hired, to get screened through the process. And what we found, actually, when we did that, was that we found people who were typically shy or quiet, but really, really incredibly technically competent with so much horsepower that just needed that, kind of to break that barrier. And so I think a lot of that is changing, but the way in which we recruit, the way in which we see the world also needs to change along with that.
I think I'd just like to add in this whole importance of interdisciplinarity, and again, comparing university systems across the world and in the U.S. I don't believe anybody matches up to the U.S. in the flexibility that you've shown in accommodating interdisciplinarity. And I think MIT is, of course, a great example of that. But in fields like what I've been pursuing in genomics and bioinformatics, it's absolutely critical. And it's a huge challenge to be able to find such skill or dexterity that people have, which somehow the U.S. system has encouraged, and I commend the U.S. for that, and selecting U.S. makes a lot of sense simply because people have that ability to sit between disciplines. The silos of university systems are legend, right? So.
There's this expression about how the universe doesn't separate, all these different topics. They're integrated. Yeah, we're seeing a great renaissance in the universities. I was lucky to serve on the MIT board with Desh, and the innovation edX there, Coursera, Udacity, kind of online from all the universities, but also just on campus. This flip into active learning, much more returning to the lab, which I think is really their heritage, but kind of got away from it. And so we're seeing a lot of that in the U.S. and innovation there. So thank you. So we have time for probably some thoughts and advice from everybody. I think it would be great. People are at all kinds of different stages, but extraordinary experience working inside the U.S. And so maybe I was thinking, what are some things that you wish you knew? Or maybe things that you're glad you do know, or just any kind of key insights that you have. And if you hear someone say something that reminds you of something, please jump in. So, maybe you want to start, Eric? We'll ask you.
Well, it's probably a lot of things. I would just maybe one comment on the skills issue that we were just talking about. I think it's great that the president is hosting these high school students who are doing incredible things at the White House, because we really should be honoring those students, and Siemens is a big supporter of that through our Siemens competition.
Yeah, can you say quickly the student you have? Say a little bit about this student, the Siemens student, and his or her work?
Yeah, they developed a new way of testing for diagnostics, and it's essentially I couldn't do it justice by trying to explain it, but it's a PhD level type work, and most of the students, for example, in the Siemens competition, one of which is over at the White House today, they get mentored and advised by these people because they're working on things that are really game-changing kind of ideas. And so I think, the U.S. is doing well. The university system and things, the PhD level programs, the ability to access that for research is incredible. What the lesson learned for us was that the skill levels that we can use in manufacturing are in dire need of upgrading. We've opened several new plants in the last few years, and we've really struggled in some of those areas to find the skills that we need. So in fact, we've imported the German apprentice model to some of our locations. We now have several locations. I was part of the President's Advanced Manufacturing Council, where I was one of the co-leads of the workforce piece, really helping to figure out how do we not only design these kind of apprentice and co-op programs, but how do we scale them, and how do we make them transferable across different parts of the country, so that if you have a certificate in one state, you can take it to another state. Because frankly, as we move into this new age, this new industrial age, and everything becomes digital, if you take a look at a modern manufacturing plant, the skill level required is much higher than it was in the past. Everything's run by a computer, a robot, a laser, and the production workers need to have a much higher set of skills. And that's really where we're lacking the kind of skills development and training programs. And I think one of the messages to all of you when you come over here is not only to, when you're looking at locations to put people, make sure you go and spend some time talking to the community colleges and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and things to understand what that local community is doing in terms of workforce development. But also, when you come here, be ready to help participate in training the workers of the future, because that's one thing that we've really slipped on here in the U.S. is not investing enough of our money as businesses into that workforce, and also helping the educators understand what are the needs of for the future.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've been looking, if you even look into history, you see there's a lot more apprenticeship, of course in deep history, but even more recently, and we had gotten away from that. And so working together with the corporations and our employers to have programs to kind of onboard and upskill Americans into those jobs is really critical, especially, as you said, as more and more jobs are coming in manufacturing back to our shores, and these areas are just growing, making sure the workforce is there, and that there's a continuum of learning just as a habit. You know, as humanity, people are living 100 plus years now, so we need to have that. So thank you, Eric.
I'd like to 100% second Eric's comment at this end where we make stuff. Being able to make stuff is very, very important. Having just fundamental skills and interest in natural sciences, vocational training, the apprenticeship model, which is well known from Europe. Much more needs to be done there. You asked what we would have liked to have known. I would perhaps turn it a little bit around to say what I'm glad that I didn't know. First of all, you have to be very patient. You're not going to crack the U.S. market one Monday morning. This is hard work. It's taking a long time. You have to have deep pockets and be willing to invest for the long haul. Then one thing, at least coming from Europe, there is a different legal system here in the United States. Compliance is very, very important. If you're not compliant, liabilities can bankrupt your company. As a European company, I would love to see tort reform in the U.S. This is currently in the bucket of can't do, I understand, but it would be something which would liberate a lot of resources. It would allow companies to introduce a lot of services and products in the U.S., which they don't do today for fear of liabilities. Then finally, my hobby pet at the moment is TTIP. Enormous values and job creation can take place if we can get political will on both sides of the Atlantic to get TTIP done. We estimate that 750,000 U.S. jobs can be created. In my country, 15,000 jobs can be created. In the pharmaceutical industry, 9 out of 10 leading pharmaceutical companies are from Europe or United States. And 80% of the value created in the pharmaceutical industry is created between Europe and United States. Tremendous opportunities for harmonization of market access and regulatory. Just let's get it done. It's difficult from the European perspective, but it also looks quite difficult from the U.S. perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
I guess what I wish I knew, the U.S. is a hub for software engineers. What I wish I knew was that a lot of the software engineers we would be able to find would not be Americans, and so we would face very big immigration hurdles in our hiring. And it's because of the way in which computer science education and who chooses to be engineering and computer science majors in US universities and the graduating classes are still very largely not Americans. And so I think there's still a great value add in keeping the people here because a lot of IP is generated, a lot of research is generated, and the best minds in this space still live here. But I did wish I knew a lot more about immigration before I started the process.
Yeah, it's a good point. The president has been working hard on this issue. There's some new entrepreneurship visa directions, which are going well. Also helping students who have studied here to stay longer, which is part of the executive action, as well as those who are married to someone who is here with a visa so that they can work also. So, many different reforms there that he's gone as far as he can get. I know we need Congress to act, but at least some improvement there. But an excellent point. Dash.
I think the world has changed quite a bit in the last 20, 30 years. It's going to change a lot in the next 20, 30 years. And every change is going to be led by somebody, some entrepreneur. And there's no lack of innovators for that. Just like we see at MIT, and MIT is only one of the hundreds of places in US where these new ideas are circulating. But these innovators in US have to learn how to collaborate with people both inside and outside of the United States. So I think it's the US innovators have to learn how to collaborate, and people from outside of US have to learn how to leverage. It's I think, just to echo this caution of patience, innovators always think that if they have an idea, the problem is solved. And whereas there's 1,000 bridges here to cross before the idea really becomes an impactful idea. And people from outside also think that if they just have access to that innovation, maybe the problem goes away. But if an entrepreneur, if people can think of a problem that's worth solving, I think we can solve that problem now.
Okay, I'd just like to bring up 2 points. I think one is, I think you mentioned it at the outset, open data. Mm-hmm. And I think bioinformatics would not exist as a field if it wasn't for the NIH and NCBI and all the efforts to make the data open. So again, enormously important for this field, and I think it's helped the U.S. industry as well. The second is that as we've mentioned now a couple of times, the ecosystem that's available, and a big part of that ecosystem is risk capital, right? Whether it is from the venture private equity sectors or even the retail markets. As innovators, we always look to the capital markets here as guidance for how to drive our innovations to be acceptable to these markets. But I do believe that that's a very important factor in how innovation gets driven the world over, because everyone's watching the U.S. Appetite for risk in technology innovation, particularly.
Right, and we're joined by many great investors who have come to SelectUSA today, which we would appreciate. There's also, on the very starting end, some great innovation happening in funding with Kickstarter and Indiegogo and these other models, which are also great at that kind of like angel investing crowd stage. So we are nearing our time, and so I guess if there's any last lightning round things, I think we'll end with that. Thank you to all of you for being here and for your collaboration and the many things that will come from all the conversations and the insights that are gained from what we hear and what we talk about together. So it really is, I think that the underpinnings of this panel have to do with ecosystem and all the diverse components, from research to location to talent to innovation to licensing models and finance, all the pieces that it takes. And I do think we've touched on emerging markets and developed markets. I was actually in Uganda and Kenya when I got the message to come talk to the White House about this job. So it's really quite a global environment that we're in, which is exciting. And so with that, Eric, Lars, Sarah, Desh, Vijay, thank you so much for your insights, and we'll end with that. Thank you.
Thank you.